All right. Continuing our study of the book of Exodus. Today we're going to start with chapter 9 and try to get through chapter 12. Got some doubts about how far we'll get, but we'll press on. Continuing to study about the plagues that were visited on Egypt. And as we discussed last time, the purpose of the plagues and the reason God selected the 10 specific type of plagues that he had was for the purpose of, in essence, humiliating the quote-unquote gods of Egypt. And I had a little handout that I passed out, I think last time or the time before, that gave the names of each one of those Egyptian gods. Now, the question is, one of the things you think about is, were these plagues sent for the benefit of the children of Israel? Were they sent for the benefit, if you will, of Egypt? Or were they sent for some other reason or benefit?
When you say a benefit, it sounds like that you're saying the good of it.
Yep.
I don't see no good in it. Do you?
Well, ultimately there was a good that came out of the plagues, right?
Yeah.
They were terrible.
But at the time, it wasn't, was it?
No, it wasn't. It was a terrible thing. I mean, by definition, it's a plague. It's not something good, right? But we also know that it came from God, right? Every one of them came from God for a specific reason. Was it for the benefit of the Egyptians or the children of Israel or somebody else? What do you think?
Israel.
Israel, okay. In what sense?
Well, it was showing him what he could do. And he had told him he was going to do it.
Right.
And he followed out on his word.
Yeah.
His word don't change.
Why did God have to go through those 10 steps? Why did he just say, let my people go, and why did he just crush Egypt at the time and set it free? Why did he have to go through those 10 steps?
Well, it's hard for me to explain, but I believe that the reason he went to the 10th step is to show what he can do. If he'd done it all at one time, they wouldn't have comprehended or went through all the misery or saw all the misery, because whenever it would happen, they wouldn't have where the Israelites were staying at. It didn't happen to them, did it?
No, it didn't. It sure didn't.
It happened to Pharaoh and his people, and they were sitting there looking at it.
That's right.
And if it happened all at one time, it wouldn't have, I don't think they would have got the whole understanding of it or seen it.
I think you're right. I think you're exactly right. As we studied before, God always works in sequence to accomplish his purposes. And as he was working here, he did these 10 miraculous things, 10 things that have never been replicated ever before. And he worked in sequence, and he was sequentially humiliating each one of the deities of Egypt, not only because the Egyptians worshiped them, but there is some evidence that the Israelis had started to worship them as well. We talked about it last time. Part of the evidence of that is when the children of Israel got into the wilderness, one of the first things they did was they built a golden calf, which was one of the deities of Egypt. And so they were, the children of Israel had been watching these deities of Egypt for 400 years. They had seen the people worship them, and I suspect that in part the children of Israel were giving some amount of respect to them. So it was necessary that God humiliate them one at a time and show that his power was superior to each one of those. Now, as we talked about last time, God works in our lives the same way, to the extent that false gods or idols have a hold on us. He will put a plague on them, and sometimes that plague spills over to us. Sometimes we feel the misery. As Tommy pointed out, one of the things that God was demonstrating is his mighty power. That if it had just taken care of the deliverance in one fell swoop, well, people might have thought it was just a fluke, or that it was a natural occurrence. But God systematically and in sequence worked through and destroyed each one of them. And in the process, the whole world knew, Egypt knew, Israel knew, everybody else knew that it was a very difficult process, because here's Egypt, the most powerful nation in the world. They have the most powerful army in the world. They're the wealthiest nation in the world. And God is trying to accomplish the deliverance of his people out of the hands of this most powerful nation. They held on tight, which is to demonstrate what? That sin holds on very tightly to us, and that our deliverance from sin is no small thing.
It was to let them know who was in control.
That's right. That's right. And also to show that the grip of Satan on God's people is a powerful grip. And it takes the mighty hand of God. I think one of the things that the nation of Israel saw from this is that, and one of the things that God wanted to demonstrate, is that they had no ability to save themselves. If they relied on their own power, there's just no way that they could accomplish the deliverance. But God did it, and he did it in a miraculous way. And he did it despite the fact that Satan had a very strong hold on each one of them and didn't want to let any one of them go. But at the end, the deliverance was complete, and it was miraculous, and all the world knew about it. Okay.
One thing about the Israelite, even every time that he would do this here, to put out one of them plagues on them or something like that there, and then they would see it, then they still wouldn't believe it too. They had problems with it too, and everything.
I think you're right. One of the things I was reading earlier this week about, we don't get to it until we get to chapter 12, but let me read it now. We'll read it again when we get to chapter 12. It's something that you've heard before, but it made me question the sequence. A lot of times when we read something in the Bible, even in particular book of the Bible, that the chapters are out of sequence. Sometimes there's an event recorded, for example, in chapter 12 that occurred, prior to what happened in chapter 3. But I wondered about chapter 12, particularly towards the middle section of it, chapter 12, verse 12, when God is talking about he'll go through the land of Egypt and he'll strike down the firstborn. Then he says, he'll execute his judgments against all the gods of Egypt. I will execute my judgments. I am the Lord. So when he says he's going to execute his judgments, he's really referring to all of the plagues, all the 10 plagues. And then he says, and the blood shall be a sign for you on the house where you live. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. So at the time chapter 12 comes along, all of the 10 plagues have already occurred, except the death angel hasn't come yet. But God is saying at that time that no plague will befall you, which led me to believe that perhaps these words might have been spoken before the plagues ever began. Because God says, I'm going to pour out my wrath to do what? He says, I'm going to execute judgments against all the gods of Egypt. And then he says, but you will be safe. None of the plagues will touch you. So it was almost if you will, a foreshadowing there. But anyway.
But wait a minute, weren't some of the earlier ones, didn't they go to Goshen?
Mm-mm.
No?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
It's not as specific. When we get to the cattle, and we're going to read about the cattle in chapter 9, it's very specific that it says the plague fell on the cattle of the Egyptians and not the Israelis. But that's not to say that some of the earlier ones did fall on it. And I think we see there in chapter 12. In chapter 12 that none of them did. I think we know that, as Tommy pointed out, that Israel saw all of these plagues that befell Egypt, but they also saw that they were saved from them, that they were set apart, they were protected from the plagues.
That part, was that called
Goshen? Land of Goshen.
Yeah, none of the plagues ever went into it. If those Israelites was in that land there, they was safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought there was one or two in the beginning that got them, but no?
No, I think they were exempt. Again, it doesn't say specifically, I think, until you get to the plague on the cattle. But what we see in chapter 12, I think, tells us that none of them did. All right. Chapter 9. Jackie, would you pick up there? And by the way, we're down to plague number 5.
Then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, this is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go and continue to hold them back, The hand of the Lord will bring a terrible plague on your livestock in the field, on your horses and donkeys and camels, and on your cattle and sheep and goats. But the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and that of Egypt, so that no animal belonging to the Israelites will die.
Pause right there just a second. You automatically think here that there's a line drawn between the land of Goshen and the rest of Egypt, and that it's sort of like a geographical boundary. But one of the things that you want to remember about this, remember when, when Joseph brought his father and his brothers over from the land of Canaan, Joseph introduced them to Pharaoh by saying, my people are shepherds, we tend animals. And in fact, Pharaoh noted that they were so good at what they did that Pharaoh gave some of his cattle over to the sons of Israel, and they took care of them. So what we might have here is we might have a circumstance where you had an intermingling of the cattle that belonged to the Israelites and the cattle that belonged to the Egyptians that was being cared for by the Israelites, and some of those died and some of those lived. So that was even a more miraculous thing, and that may be why we have the distinction here, that those that belong to the Israelites lived, whereas those that belong to the Egyptians died. And the other thing that we know about this is that there was not at this point in time total segregation or sequestration of the children of Israel from the Egyptians. And how do we know that? Because when they left, it said that the Israelites went to their neighbors, the Egyptians, and got gold and silver and clothing from them, which the Egyptians gladly gave to them. So that we know that there was some intermingling of the people at that time. So here we see a great miracle, and I think it was God was getting more selective. He was showing the people that the division is not just a geographical division. It is my selection. I'm choosing to protect the children of Israel and their property, and I'm destroying that which belongs to the Egyptians. All right, read on.
Isn't that what he does to believers?
Absolutely.
He protects them, and those that don't believe, they're going to hell.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Just like the parable that Jesus told of the wheat and the tares. The wheat was sown, but somebody came along and sowed some weeds, and Jesus said, no, let them grow up together. They look the same, but there'll be a day of harvest. Well, there'll be a separation of the wheat from the tares. But good point. Read on.
The Lord set a time and said, tomorrow the Lord will do this in the land. And the next day the Lord did it. All the livestock of the Egyptians died, but not one animal belonging to the Israelites died. Pharaoh sent men to investigate and found that not even one of the animals of the Israelites had died. Yet his heart was unyielding, and he would not let the people go.
Pause right there. So that'd be a pretty amazing thing, particularly if the cattle of the Egyptians was intermingled with the cattle of the Israelites. When they went to take stock and they saw, hey, like two of them are standing in the same field together, one of them dies and one of them lives. So God's hand is definitely in this. And it was something that nobody could explain at the time, other than by reference to God doing his thing. All right, Kathy, pick up with verse 8, please, ma'am.
Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, take handfuls of soot from a furnace and have Moses toss them into the air in the presence of Pharaoh.
Pause right there. So he's going to, some translations say a furnace, some say a kiln. But I looked this up, and I don't know if you have a footnote to this, but evidently where this was is this could very well have been a place of human sacrifice, where the Egyptians had sacrificed human beings and then burned them up in a furnace or a kiln for the purpose of bringing health to the rest of the land. And it would have been, no doubt, something for the benefit of one of their Egyptian gods. And so God Jehovah tells Moses, go take some of those ashes and throw them into the air, and then do exactly the opposite of what the sacrifice was supposed to do. Okay, read on, Kathy.
It will become fine dust over the whole land of Egypt, and festering boils will break out on men and animals throughout the land. So they took soot from a furnace and stood before Pharaoh. Moses tossed it into the air, and festering boils broke out on men and animals. The magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils that were on them, and all the Egyptians. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said to Moses.
Keep reading.
The Lord said to Moses, get up early in the morning, confront Pharaoh, and say to him, this is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go, so that they may worship me. or this time I will send the full force of plagues against you, against your officials and your people, so you may know me, that there is no one like me in all the earth. For by now I could have stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with a plague that would have wiped you off the earth. But I have raised you up from this very purpose, that I might show you my power, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. You still set yourself against my people and will not let them go.
Pause right there. Okay, so we see a further explanation of what God is doing, and we can see that in meting out these plagues one at a time, he's also being merciful, because he says, I could have wiped everybody out, but it wouldn't have accomplished my purpose. And my purpose is so that everyone may know that there's no one like me in all of the earth. And so God says, I could have wiped you out, but I didn't. I'm going step by step, and I haven't killed a bunch of people. I have caused you misery, but my purpose will be accomplished. Now, before we move to the next plague, as I was reading through this, I thought about old Job. And you remember the plague that hit him? What happened to him? Huh? Yeah, he was overcome with boils, and I thought about this when the boils hit the Egyptians. And I started thinking about, now, exactly where does the story of Job fit into this? And could this have been going on at the same time? Well, we saw back in Genesis chapter 46:13, when the census, if you will, is given of the family of Jacob, and listed among his sons, and actually a grandson of Jacob is given the name Job, and many scholars think that is the Job of the Old Testament story. And so what does that suggest? We can tell by the way that Job is written that it would have been written around the time of the patriarchs, but it doesn't say exactly when it was. But we do know that Job, when the plague befell him, he was not in Egypt at the time. It was said that he was living, anybody remember the place where he lived? It's called the land of Uz. We don't know exactly where that is, but it's probably kind of northeast of the land of Canaan, probably around where Damascus, Syria is. That's thought where that's where we think Job may have lived. And it's interesting. Again, nobody knows. I'm just speculating here. Job could have lived during the time that the rest of the nation of Israel was in captivity in Egypt. Why he wasn't there, nobody knows. How he wound up being somewhere else, nobody knows. But apparently he was at a different place at the time. And I think it's interesting that he is smitten by boils the same way that the Egyptians are smitten by boils. Because you remember the story, as the story opens, there's a heavenly council going on, and God is questioning his angels, and Satan comes up. And God says to Satan, what you been doing? And Satan says, I've been traipsing around in the earth. And God says, remember, have you seen my servant Job down there? What a good guy he is. And Satan says, if you take away his possessions, he'll curse you. And God says, all right, do that. He said, don't take his life. And so he takes. Then Satan takes away all of Job's family, his children, all of his possession, all of his cattle. Basically throws a plague on his house. He loses everything. And Job is still faithful to God. He does not curse him. And then Satan says, skin for skin. If you only put a disease on this guy, he will curse you and die. And God says, all right, you can go put a disease on him, just don't take his life. And so what does Satan do? Satan may have hurled the same thing on Job that God had hurled on Satan's people in Egypt. That is the plague of boils. And the plague of boils that hit Job was so horrendous that when his 3 friends saw him, what did they do? They gathered around him, they tore their clothes, they threw dirt on their head, and they didn't say a word for 7 days. It was so despicable that what they saw of their friend, that they couldn't say anything for 7 days. And then we have the long discourse. And the reason I thought about it is because we have all been, to one degree or another, beset with problems the way Job was beset with problems. And so we have to continue to ask ourselves, particularly when you're right in the middle of a plague, so to speak, when you're right in the middle of some trauma, when you're right in the middle of something that you really don't like and you wonder why God did this. You remember what the lesson was that Job learned from all this? From all of his misery that he went through?
He wasn't God.
That's right. That's right. Job starts off by when he was originally smitten, his wife comes to him and said, "Look, just curse God and die. Just hang it up, you know." And and Job says, "Should we accept just good from God and reject adversity?" You know, a very profound question. You know, it's like if you want the good, you better be prepared to take the adversity as well. Why? Because, hey, like Jack said, God is sovereign. And then at one point in his discourse, you know, Job, not only has he lost his family, his possessions, his health, but then his friends come around and they accuse him of what?
Sin.
They accuse him of sin. They say, look, you know, God is just. You wouldn't be having the problems you're having right now, except for the fact that you are a miserable sinner. You brought every bit of this stuff on yourself. So they want to add insult to injury. And at one point in time, Job cries out. He says, "Though he would slay me, yet will I trust in him." You know, what a profession of faith.
But in that, when you talked to her, you did come out that Job had sinned.
He
right?
did. He did. And what was the nature of Job's sin? If you go to the very end, you know, if it weren't for that last chapter of Job, we'd think, what is this all about? You know, was God just, you know, allowing this cruel thing to happen to him? And you get to the very end, and what do we see? Job's confession. Then Job answered the Lord, and this was after, you know, Job was, he's really feeling sorry for himself, and he cries out to God. He says, "God, why are you doing this to me? Why are you've taken all this stuff away from me, but also you humiliated me in front of my own friends?" And God said, "Who put you in charge?" He said, "Why are you saying all these things as if you have a right to say anything?" And then after you know, God tells him about, "Look, I'm the one who created the universe. I'm the one who has done everything." Then Job confesses. He says, "And Job answered the Lord and said, I know that thou canst do all things, and no purpose of thine can be thwarted. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge?" He's asking this of himself. He says, "Therefore I have declared that which I did not understand." What a profound profession that is, that Job says, "I have declared that which I don't understand." What has he declared? He's declared that God was being unfair to him, and then he realized, no, I don't have any right to say that. I can't declare God to be unfair because God is sovereign. He can do with me whatever he wants to do with me. And then he says, "Things too wonderful for me, that which I did not know you've explained to me." He said, "Hear now and I will speak." He said, "I will ask thee, and do thou instruct me. I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, and now my eyes see thee. Therefore I retract, and I repent in dust and ashes." So what does Job do? He repents from every negative thought he ever had against God. That's something that we need to do too, because, you know, we have all been in a circumstance where we believe we were doing exactly what God told us to do. You know, we thought we were being obedient, and then what happens? You know, we get kicked in the teeth. And you say, "God, that is not fair." Stop right there. Stop right there. When we begin to question why God did what he did, we don't have the right to do that, because God is sovereign. And one of the subtexts out of this whole book of Job is that when we are afflicted, and we all will be afflicted, you know, there are many psalms written about our affliction. What we should do in our affliction is not to question God or tell God that we're upset because you're not being fair with him. What we should be asking is, "God, in my affliction, what are you trying to teach me? In my affliction, what are you trying to teach me? Because there's obviously something that I don't know that I need to learn. And evidently, the only way I can learn it is for you to put me in the winepress, for you to put this affliction on me." So therefore, never lose sight of the fact that whatever affliction you find yourself in, and we will all find ourselves in some sort of affliction at one time or another, and perhaps at all times, what we should do is recognize that God causes all things to work together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So even though it may seem evil at the time, even though it's not what we want, even though it's something that we hate, even though it's something that hurts or causes us humiliation, that God has a positive plan in all that. And we should be saying, God, please help me to understand what it is that I need to learn in this affliction. And God will teach us. And I'll submit to you, at the end of his days, Job was thankful for all the affliction that God put him through. All the misery, all the loss that he suffered. I'll submit to you, Job was thankful for that. And we too, hopefully, will come to the point that we can be thankful for all the misery and all the affliction that God puts us through. Because, again, don't ever forget how much he loves us. Don't ever forget that. And don't ever forget how powerful he is. You know, he could, like that, he could take our affliction away from us. Every one of them. Every one of them. But why doesn't he do it? God, why don't you do it right now? I don't want this affliction. Take it away from me. No. I have a lesson learned in this. We all do. Okay. 18. Hail. Terry, would you read that for us? Chapter 9, 18.
Therefore, at this time tomorrow, I will send the worst hailstorm that has ever fallen on Egypt, from the day it was founded till now. Give an order now to bring your livestock and everything you have in the field to a place of shelter, that the hail will fall on every man and animal that has not been brought in and is still out in the field, and they will die.
Pause right there. I thought all the cattle had been killed. Where did this livestock come from? Did y'all have that same question as you read through that? But where did that livestock come from that's getting killed by the hail? If all the livestock had been killed over there in chapter 9, verse, what does it say? Verse 6. So the Lord did this thing on the morrow, and all the livestock of Egypt died, but the livestock of the sons of Israel, none of it died. So where did it come from? Well, the Bible doesn't tell us that. But I suspect what happened is that when all the livestock of Egypt died, the Egyptians immediately went to their neighbors, the neighboring countries, and began to acquire some more livestock and brought it in. And so they thought, all right, God, you killed them, but we can bring them back. And God says, oh, guess what? I got other ways to deal with your livestock. Don't think that you can replenish it, because whatever you bring back is going to be killed by this hail. Yeah, question has been asked, how intense was this hail? And how large were the hailstones? I remember when I was a kid, I had a book that reported some interesting facts from around the world. And there was a time in recorded history where hailstones fell in India. They were almost as big as elephants. Can you imagine that? Now, it doesn't say how big these hailstones were, but hailstones can get mighty big. They can get mighty big. And so when these hailstones fell, it says that they fell, and it was like fiery hailstones that fell down. But can you imagine when these hailstones fell? It said it stripped the trees, it killed the animals. Now it would have destroyed some buildings, but not perhaps all the buildings. But this must have been one intense hail. Have y'all ever been in a hailstorm before? What's the biggest hail you've ever seen?
Golf ball.
Yeah, I've never seen it that big, but I've seen pictures of it coming down and just destroying car windows coming down. Can you imagine hailstones even the size of watermelons coming down?
I know.
What kind of damage that would do?
In the late 70s, we got a hailstorm out here that in the evening time, when we woke up the next morning, it was still ice in the shades of the trees, and this happened in July, August.
Wow.
They just had one somewhere. I read they showed it on the news, and it was like close to 10 inches deep. Looked like snow.
Wow.
And this storm that just went through. I had an aunt that moved to Little Rock, Arkansas, and her neighbors didn't tell her to keep her car under the carport. And one come up, and that thing, it was a blue car. It didn't chip the paint, but it was just one ripple after another,
Yeah.
The whole car.
I lived in Lyman, Germany, and it's when I was about 9 or 10, and we had a tornado come through Lyman, and when it was all done, we had at least 5 or 6 inches deep in hail, and they were this big.
Wow. Wow. Destructive. Read on, Terry.
Yeah.
Those officials of Pharaoh who feared the word of the Lord hurried to bring their slaves and their livestock inside. But those who ignored the word of the Lord left their slaves and livestock in the field. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand toward the sky, so that the hail will fall all over Egypt, on men and animals, and on everything growing in the fields of Egypt." When Moses stretched out his staff toward the sky, the Lord sent thunder and hail and lightning flashed down to the ground. So the Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt. Hail fell and lightning flashed back and forth. It was the worst storm in the land of Egypt since it had become a nation. Throughout Egypt, hail struck everything in the fields, both men and animals. It beat down everything growing in the fields and stripped every tree. The only place it did not hail was the land of Goshen, where the Israelites were. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron. "At this time I have sinned," he said to them. "The Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong. Pray to the Lord, for we have had enough thunder and hail. I will let you go. You don't have to stay any longer." Moses replied, "When I have gone out to the city, I will spread out my hands in prayer to the Lord. The thunder will stop, and there will be no more hail. So you may know that the earth is the Lord's. But I know that you and your officials still do not fear the Lord God." The flax and barley were destroyed, since the barley had headed and the flax was in bloom. The wheat and spelt, however, were not destroyed because they ripened later. Then Moses left Pharaoh and went out of the city. He spread out his hands toward the Lord. The thunder and hail stopped, and the rain no longer poured down on the land. When Pharaoh saw that the rain and the hail and thunder had stopped, he sinned again. He and his officials hardened their hearts. So Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he would not let the Israelites go, just as the Lord had said through Moses.
Pause right there. Yeah, I wonder if at this point in time, the Egyptians said, well, we're not going to build any more flat roof buildings. Maybe that's when they started the pyramids. You know, with the pointy top made out of stone, so the hail wouldn't damage them. Just speculating there.
I wondered what the Egyptian history shows during that time. They show all these same happenings, and they recorded everything because they were pretty far superior then.
Yeah.
So were those officials spared, though? It said those who believed brought their, so they were spared?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
So this didn't kill all the cattle that was there, just the ones that were outside, the ones that didn't believe. You know, I was reading something about how, and I'm very interested in how secular history intersects with biblical history. And I was reading somewhere recently that during an excavation, they found mass graves. And in the graves, they found thousands and thousands of male children that were buried like in a mass grave, and there was no explanation for it. And so some surmise that could have been the time of the 10th plague, when the firstborn, which would, you know, I think it is said that it applied to the firstborn son, but all these male children were killed and buried in mass. But I also read somewhere that this event was so devastating to Egypt that an order was given later on that none of this should be recorded, because everybody knew that this was God's curse upon the nation of Egypt, and they didn't want that recorded in their history as if, you know, the supreme God was against them. So that could be part of. Now there are some, you know, some writings, and there is some reference in Egyptian history to this foreign people who lived there for a while and were slaves, a great number of people. I don't know if there's reference to the land of Goshen, but yeah, they do refer to this group of people by a name that's very similar to the Hebrew word for Hebrew. So that'd be worth some study. Maybe that we put that on the list. And
Well, we have a friend that's an Egyptian. He's over there visiting right now for 3 weeks. When he gets back, I'm gonna ask him. You know, that's one question I never asked him.
you know, I read something else about that too. That even to this very day, one of the customs of the Egyptians is to put blood on their doors as a sign of, to invoke a blessing. Yeah, and where could that have come from except a remembrance of this?
Well, you said that, where did they get their animals from? Well, there were animals right there, so it doesn't say it, but I think I'd start looking at the Israelites' animals.
Yeah, they probably did grab some of them. They sure did. Yeah.
And they might have sold them to the Egyptians to prosper,
Yeah.
because God meant for them to prosper.
They sure did. Okay, chapter 10, the locust. Sarah, you want to read?
Then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may perform these miraculous signs of mine among them, that you may tell your children and your grandchildren how I dealt harshly with the Egyptians and how I performed my signs among them, and that you may know that I am the Lord. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, this is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, say. How long will you refuse to humble yourselves before me? Let my people go so that they may worship me. But if you refuse to let them go, I will bring locusts to your country tomorrow. They will cover the face of the ground so that they cannot be seen. They will devour what little you have left after the hail, including every tree that is growing in the field. They will fill your houses and those of all your officials, and all the Egyptians. Something neither your fathers nor your forefathers have ever seen from the day they settled in this land till now. Then Moses turned and left Pharaoh. Pharaoh's officials said to him, how long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go, so that they may worship the Lord their God. Do you not realize that Egypt is ruined?
Pause right there. At this point in time, even Pharaoh's officials have acknowledged that Egypt is just in ruins. It's like, can it get any worse than this? Well, it's fixing to get worse. Warren, you pick up verse 8.
Then Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh. Go worship the Lord your God, he said, but just who will be going? Moses answered, we will go with our young and old, with our sons and daughters, and with our flocks and herds, because we are to celebrate a festival to the Lord. Pharaoh said, the Lord be with you. If I let you go, along with your women and children, clearly you are bent on evil. No, have only the men go and worship the Lord. So that's what you've been asking for. And Moses and Aaron were driven out of Pharaoh's presence.
Pause right there. So Pharaoh's acting like he's going to relent. And he says, all right, you can go, but just the men go out and worship. Leave the children, the cattle, and everything else here. And Moses said, nope, that's not what God said. He said everybody. So read on.
And the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over Egypt so that the locusts will swarm over the land and devour everything growing in the fields, everything left by the hail. So Moses stretched out his staff over Egypt, and the Lord made the east wind blow across the land all that day and all that night. By morning, the wind had brought the locusts. They invaded all Egypt and settled down in every area of the country in great numbers. Never before had there been such a plague of locusts, nor will there ever be again. They covered all the ground until it was black. They devoured all that was left after the hail, everything growing in the fields and the fruit on the trees. Nothing green remained on tree, plant, in all the land of Egypt. Very quickly, summoned Moses and Aaron and said, I have sinned against you, Lord, against the Lord your God and against you. Now forgive my sin, and once more, and pray to the Lord your God to take this deadly plague away from me. Moses then left Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord, and the Lord changed the wind to the very strong west wind, which caught up the locusts and carried them into the Red Sea. Not a locust was left anywhere in Egypt, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go.
All right, pause right there. I've never been in a plague of locusts, but I've read about it before, that even of the type that occurred in recorded history, and I guess they continue to occur in certain places. When those locusts come, they eat everything. They eat the grass, they eat the trees, they eat the crops in the field. In this case, the locusts were even in the houses of the people, so it would have been eating the food that they had stored in their houses. And basically, what these locusts did was to strip everything that was growing, all the food out of Egypt. Can you imagine how devastating that would have been? You know, and why Pharaoh wouldn't relent at that point in time when, you know, basically, you know, everything, all the landscape, all the crops, all that which apparently most of which was stored was eaten up. But he didn't. Verse 21. Kenny, you want to read there?
Not bad.
Joanne?
And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch out thine hands toward heaven, that they may darken over the land of Egypt, even darkness which may be felt. And Moses stretched forth his hands toward heaven, and there was a thick darkness in all the lands of Egypt 3 days. They saw not one another, neither rose any from the place 3 days. But all of the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. And Pharaoh called unto Moses and said, Go ye serve the Lord. Only let your flocks and your herds be stayed, let your little ones also go with you. And Moses said, Thou must give us also sacrifice and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice unto the Lord our God. Our cattle also shall go with us. There shall not be a hoof be left behind. For therefore must we take to serve the Lord our God, and know that with what we must serve the Lord until we come thither. And the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. Pharaoh said unto him, Get thee from me, take heed to thyself, see my face no more, for that day thou seest my face, thou shalt die. And Moses said, Thou hast spoken well. I will see thy face again no more.
All right, pause right there. Can you imagine what it would have been like to be in total darkness for 3 days? Y'all ever been down, the darkest I can recall, I remember going down into a cave one time. Maybe you've done that too. You go into a cave and then they turn all the lights off. And that darkness is thick. It's almost so thick that you can touch it. That must have been what it was like here. It is said that this plague was the next to the last. That the darkness was an assault, if you will, or an insult against what was deemed to be one of Egypt's most powerful god, which was the sun god. They worshiped the sun god. You can imagine being out there in the desert, the sun was always prevalent, and so they saw the sun every day, and they thought, even though we have the locusts, even though we have the hail, even though our cattle are killed, our sun god is still there. Well, guess what? God says, nope. You're going to be 3 days with nothing. You're going to be in total, complete darkness. And it's suggested here that they couldn't even use artificial light. They couldn't even light a torch to light things up. They're just in absolute, total darkness. And again, the total darkness also implies God withdrawing himself, his absence. You know, Jesus is the light of the world. He's the one who brings light. When God withdrew from them, they were in total, complete, utter darkness. They were walking in the darkness of their sin, if you will. All right, chapter.
Have you noticed that old Moses is really getting stronger here at the end?
Yeah.
He's really, I ain't going to can't cow thing.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, and he made a real turn. You know, when he first went to speak to Pharaoh, said, "Let my people go." Pharaoh said, "No. In fact, I'm going to make their work harder." Moses sort of tucked his tail, right? Went back to God and said, God, why did you humiliate me like this? I did exactly what you said, and my people, they had to work harder, and now they're calling me names, and things are just not going well. But now, as you say, Tommy, he's become strengthened in his faith.
Going back to your original
Yeah.
question though, who did God do this for? And I'm sitting here thinking, how stupid can Pharaoh be? I mean, a time and time again, things are happening. He's watching his country fall apart. But if we look, it says the Lord hardened his
correct.
heart.
Mhm.
So it was God's plan, right,
Yeah.
to do this all along. So, back to your original question. Tell me again who this was for?
That's my question.
You're the teacher.
Well, number one, it was for
That's cool,
Moses.
that's
Right.
like.
Okay,
Moses, that God could do it, he would do it, and he was gonna do it.
And the
the
people.
Israelites.
That they would see these gods, nor Pharaoh had any power.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things he was getting ready to do was he's getting ready to shove these Israelites out into the world,
Mhm.
So he's gonna let them multiply and multiply for 400 years. And now that he's got a whole herd of Israelites, then he's gonna make a big impression on the world on how they start out.
That's right.
And it's such an impression that it'll never be forgotten.
Yeah.
Well, the Israelites
and that's really the answer to the
Today,
question.
they're not doing very good.
That's the answer to the question. Who is it for? Was it for Pharaoh? Yeah. Was it for the Egyptians? Yeah. Was it for the Israelites? Yeah. But it's really for all people of all times in all history. That's right.
Yeah.
Because we see in this God's mighty hand delivering his people. For what purpose? What was the ultimate purpose of the nation of Israel? Really two. Number one, it was the voice of God. They were the prophets who gave us God's word, number one. But number two, and even more importantly, they were the womb of the Messiah.
Yes.
Without Israel, we wouldn't have Christ. We wouldn't have salvation. And so, this is a part of God's eternal plan of salvation, which He put into play right after Adam and Eve sinned. Took a long time to accomplish, but this is certainly an integral part of it. So,
It's also-
yeah, all these plagues were for you and you and me.
Well, he's teaching them to trust them, just like he's teaching us to trust him.
Exactly.
But it sure wasn't for Pharaoh, because
Pharaoh was doomed.
because God just used him.
Right. Yeah, and right, that's right. But look, if Pharaoh would have been a wimp, if Moses came to him and said, let my people go, it's, okay, God wouldn't have been glorified nearly as greatly. So yeah, Pharaoh hardened his own heart. God also hardened his heart. Why? So that God's power would be displayed to all the world for all time.
Yeah, maybe.
I think he would have, personally, I think he would have given up much earlier had not God intercepted
That's
that heart
right.
of his.
He's like, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I mean, enough's enough.
My brother don't give up that quickly.
Yeah. All right.
I don't believe no lawyer can argue this case here.
Argue Pharaoh's case?
Yeah.
No, you're right. You're right. Okay, chapter 11. Troy, you want to read?
And the Lord said unto Moses, Yet will I bring one plague more upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterwards he will let you go hence when he shall let you go. He shall surely thrust you out hence altogether. Speak now in the ears of the people, and let every man borrow of his neighbor, and every woman of her neighbor, jewels or silver and jewels of gold. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's servants and in the sight of the people. And Moses said, Thus saith the Lord, about midnight will I go out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sitteth upon the throne, even unto the firstborn of the maidservant that is behind the mill, and all the firstborn of the beast. And there shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as there was none like it, nor shall be like it any more. But against any man of the children of Israel shall not a dog move his tongue against man or beast, that ye may know how that the Lord doeth put a difference between the Egyptians and Israel. And all these thy servants shall come down unto me, and bow down themselves unto me, saying, Get thee out, and all the people that follow thee, and after that I will go out. And he went out from Pharaoh in a great anger. And the Lord said unto Moses, Pharaoh shall not hearken unto you, that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. And Moses and Aaron did all the wonders before Pharaoh, and the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart so that he would not let the children of Israel go out of his land.
Okay, so we know what that last plague was. We'll read about that. I guess that's a good stopping point. But we're going to see here this final plague was against Pharaoh. And again, this is an insult to the gods, quote unquote, of Egypt, because Pharaoh himself regarded himself as a god, and therefore his firstborn son, who was to inherit, would likewise have been a god. So this is the final insult or assault against the gods of Egypt. Now, next time we're going to get into chapter 12. Chapter 12 is an extremely important and significant chapter because it relates to the Passover lamb. And as we go through that, and as you read through that this week, I want you to specifically focus on the foreshadowings of Christ we see in this first Passover. And there are many of them.